since this is also a forum, we want to allow for just about 10 minutes just asking general questions or having observations, comments, research studies that you've read that you want to share information with other people. So for the next 10 minutes until 9 o'clock, I want to just have an open discussion here with anyone who has any particular questions on either what we heard or discussion on other issues that you just want to bring up. There are, besides myself, a few other, not that not everyone here is knowledgeable, but as you all are, having attended here often. But for those who are in practice, such as myself, and doing research, there are a few people here that can give some insight into that. By the way, I was reminded that I'd never introduced myself. I'm Dr. Douglas Husbands, practitioner. I'm a chiropractor, certified clinical nutritionist, and trained in functional medicine, and practicing for 26 years, and I'm right up in San Carlos. But anyway, so I wanted to open up this time for questions, comments, research that you want to question or comment on. If none, then, oh, yes, okay. We're going to use this.
Oh, gee. I'm a sergeant major in the Army. I talk loud. Okay. My question was for the speaker, for those of us who don't have gut problems, is it beneficial to still use a gluten-free diet, for instance, or is there any benefit, or because it is cost of, prohibitive, if you will, or cost more. So is there a benefit to me eating gluten-free food when I don't have a problem with my gut?
Well, I'm going to answer that from a practitioner with 26 years in practice. I would have to say that, by the way, one thing I'd have to say is that regarding you don't have a problem with your gut, oftentimes I find people may not have symptoms that they relate to gut problems, but very often I find many people have some problems with their gut. So having said that, but regarding your directly answering your question, eating gluten-free because of the what's called molecular mimicry, where you can have the gluten molecule, which can be seen similar to the body. The antigen-antibody response can be seen similar to, for instance, thyroid cells. There is that molecular mimicry where one of the reasons that autoimmune thyroiditis or Hashimoto's thyroiditis starts is because people may have, say, a gluten sensitivity. And remember, you don't either have it, or you do. It's not on-off, it's a continuum. And so you can have, depending on where you are in that continuum, you could have induction of, for instance, Hashimoto's thyroiditis as a implicating factor due to gluten sensitivity. There are a lot of problems with gluten, the gliadin molecule, and just so everyone knows, just for being technically correct here, many grains do have different types of a gluten per se. With rice, it's I think it's a raisin, or I can't remember the name. But anyway, the point is various grains. As Dr. David Perlmutter talks about in one of his books, Grain Brain, many grains can induce autoimmune-like responses in people, and depends on their susceptibility and how they're living, absolutely. So, did I answer your question?
There's also molecular mimicry between gluten and the islet cells of the pancreas, so you can go straight to diabetes 1 on insulin, getting diabetes 1.5, which means you've got the antibodies against your islet cells or something. Also, there's similarities with the Purkinje cells in the brain, which is and a cerebellum and balance, so something called gluten ataxia. And a lot of these people who are sensitive to it have no symptoms. And when you go to a doctor to measure it, they're only going to measure the anti-gliadin antibody. But gluten's got 8 components. So there could be a lot going on. There's probably about 60% of the people it's not an issue. But there's a lot of people it is an issue. And you don't know where you fall in that.
Most clinical conditions, you become aware of them because of symptoms. And most clinical conditions have preclinical phases that you go through where you don't have symptoms. So there are ways that you can potentially explore this using self-care modalities, which is one of the things that I specialize in. In other words, how can you learn something about yourself by not necessarily going to a doctor, by doing things like food challenges. So if you decide you wanted to study your response to gluten, you could do a gluten washout where you eliminate not only wheat, but closely related gluten-containing foods like rye and oats and barley, and so that you wash all that stuff out of your system. Give yourself at least 2 weeks. Takes about 10 days to clear it out of your system, so by 2 weeks you're in that. And if you want to push it out to 3, fine. But then reintroduce the wheat, not by eating a sandwich, but by taking a very, very tiny piece of wheat and putting it under your tongue under a controlled circumstance where you're monitoring your urine pH, your body temperature, your pulse rate, your blood sugar, your mood, your perception of time, anything that you can engineer conveniently by, for example, having a sit-down time with a close friend who knows you fairly well, where you can talk about things and they can pay attention to you in a way that you can't pay attention to yourself. And having a tape recorder running or a camera running where you're collecting all this data and see what happens. And a lot of people who think that they're not allergic to wheat will have an increase in their blood pressure, their pulse rate will jump up, they'll have an excitatory phase where their mind will go very fast and they'll be very talkative and very energetic, and then at some point when that inflammatory surge wears off, they zone out and they lose track of time and they don't consolidate memory. And if their friend weren't there paying attention to this, the person would think nothing happened.
Other questions? Great question, by the way. So, yes.
I think you mentioned the Cyrix test being probably the best test for saliva or gluten sensitivity, is it?
There's various arrays. There's about, let's see, there's about 12 different arrays of Cyrix. One of the ones is where you can check for intestinal permeability. But again, as Dr. Fasano also pointed out, that is not cut and dry. You cannot say just because the Cyrix, I think it's array 3, anyway, you can't say just because this one is negative or positive that it definitively is, but you can get a good idea correlated with the patient's history, signs and symptoms, other things. If there's a correlation, of course, correlation does not mean causation, but anyway, again, this is the art of healthcare. But still, it is useful, and that's not the only test, but there are other tests that can give indications as to intestinal permeability or not. There's the long-standing one, the mannitol lactulose test, where you're measuring, you take in a sugar and you measure to see if it comes out through apparently leaking gut lining. That's another one. But anyway, again, when you're dealing with people for many years, you always look at the whole. You don't just look at a piece of paper and what's on it. You look at the whole person. You listen to them, their history, physical. There are many things that you can get doing on nutritional status on physical exam. And of course, blood tests, et cetera, et cetera. So that is one of the things that can be useful. So I answer the question like that.
Where do you practice functional medicine?
In San Carlos. Dr. Douglas Husbands.
I just have something mention about Europe because I hosted a visitor recently from Europe, from Austria, and she can eat the bread there. You know, she gets the Demeter biodynamically grown grains, and so I just want to know if I'm sure many of you have seen that when you go to Europe, you can eat a lot of things that you can't eat here. So I just wanted to comment on that, and it's dramatic with the bread and the fact that people there have it in a way that, you know, totally different grains than here, and you couldn't find it here anywhere unless, you know, you make it and import it from Europe. So I just wanted to comment on that and see if anybody knew of the Demeter Farmers here and knew of the Rudolf Steiner biodynamic farming, because in Northern California there's nothing I could find, which is pretty serious, about this way of farming. So any comments or things about if anybody knows?
Well, I don't have a comment. Maybe Steve?
I have a comment, but it's not specifically about that, but I do know that there are growers all over the United States that grow heritage strains of different kinds of foods. But let me also point out, for example, Douglas, when you talked about people with autoimmune disease that may not show gut permeability but may have lead poisoning or other kinds of mitochondrial dysfunctions and stuff like that, and that's because the immune system doesn't operate in a vacuum. Your immune system is designed to be maximally primed and sensitive in the presence of oxygen and quiescent and calm in the presence of reducing equivalents. So if your energy systems aren't producing enough NADH and not generating enough vitamin C, recycling of vitamin C and recycling your glutathione, so your body becomes oxidized, that means all your antibodies in your body are primed for reactivity instead of being quiet. So in an ideal person, if you have a wound, if you skin your knee, you're a young child and you've got a good microbiome and all of that, but you skin your knee, at that site of the breaking of the skin, you have oxygen coming into the body that creates localized inflammation. That's going to prime all your antibodies as they flow through your body, so when they approach the site of that injury, they become oxidized and they organize themselves to become reactive to microbes that might be present there. And as they disperse away from that site of the injury, they go back into a quiet state, so that if you have a robust metabolism, your immune system is tightly focused on the site of an infection or the site of a trauma. It's localized. But in this day and age, where we have estrogens in our drinking water, and we have all these heavy metals, we have a level of lead that is 100 times historical norms from 2 centuries ago. Our metabolism isn't as robust as it used to be, and therefore our immune system is less focused, and therefore we have these cross-reactivities to a greater extent than we would if we were, you know, fortunate to be in a less polluted time. I'd also like to make an announcement for anybody who likes just what they've heard. I have a meetup on Sunday where I talk about self-care techniques. Some of you have been to it before. I have 2 seats that are still open for this Sunday from 1 to 4 o'clock.
And your name and the topic for everyone.
I'm Steve Fowkes. The topic is self-care. So people come in the door and they bring their topic. So I talk about what you want to talk about. But I talk about it from a self-care point of view. Of how can you discover what's going on with a particular issue that you have without having to resort to very expensive medical tests or spend half your income on supplements. If you want to meet me after the thing, but it's if you go to meetup.com, it's under Project Wellbeing.
Okay, and with that, I want everyone right now to put your things down, stand up. Yes, everyone, put your things down, stand up. And before I introduce our next speaker, Randy Hold, I want everyone to just stretch and have a good laugh. Just, okay, I'm going to time it for, all right, for 15 seconds. We're going to do our immune system's good. And you'll see how, okay. So for 15 seconds, we're going to actually, okay. Well, anyway, stop. Okay, all right. I want everyone just to start laughing now.